Well, we're going to change gears here real quick, and we're going to talk a little bit about now this major story that I told you about in St. Louis, and then we'll go to break. Jeanine Molloff is a journalist in St. Louis, and I spoke with her earlier this week about this issue. We're joined today by Jeanine Molloff in St. Louis, Missouri. She's going to talk with us a little bit about an interesting EPA Superfund site that not too many people know about. Now, Jeanine has contributed a number of articles here to UK Progressive, and she's been on the podcast before. We're going to talk, though, about some of the things she's written about in the past. So she's written for UK Progressive on the Ferguson riot, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, TTIP, and a number of these trade agreements, which she's done a lot of work on. And now we have an underground fire between an EPA Superfund site and another toxic dump site that if the two ever meet, it could be ball game for up to 3 million people's water supply in and around St. Louis. What could possibly go wrong, Jeanine? Welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Dennis. Oh, so many things could go wrong. This has been a disaster in the making since, since forever. The situation known as Westlake has been a Superfund site since 1990. And ever since then, it has been a major headache. You're right, it's two landfills. They're both owned by Republic Waste, and Bill Gates is their majority stockholder. The Bridgeton landfill is the landfill that has an underground, they call it a subsurface smoldering event.
I'm sorry.
That's a fire.
A subsurface smoldering event. Okay.
Yes. Translation, underground methane fire, most probably.
Okay. Methane, what could possibly go wrong there?
Well, the thing is this, like a lot of landfill fires they're underground, obviously, they usually are ignited and continued with a heavy presence of methane and some other toxics. The problem, and these things can go on, they can rage on for years, and this one has since at least 2010, as far as we know. The problem is that it sits adjacent about 1,000 feet, 1,200 feet, depending on estimates, from the Westlake landfill, which it previously was an unlined dump where the oldest nuclear waste, since dating back to the Manhattan Project, was ceremoniously and illegally dumped.
Okay, so we've got an underground methane fire next to illegally stored nuclear waste circa 1950.
Oh, since dating back to World War II, circa like
1946, 1945.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what's happened is this stuff wasn't stored, it was just dumped. It has been exposed to the elements. We live in Missouri's in the middle of what's called Tornado Alley. When we have heavy rainfall, you have a watershed event where this ground that's been contaminated, the water rushes the erosion down and it goes into the water supply and the sewage. It's really a mess. And if and when, I won't say when, if, I'll say when that underground methane fired Bridgeton landfill comes into contact with massive quantities of dumped nuclear waste, it could create, we've been told by scientists, it could create the mother of all dirty bombs. And it wouldn't just be that area in St. Louis County or St. Louis, it could be really most of the Midwest.
So you're talking about a potential event of which nobody really knows the size of the scope of it, but with this dirty bomb, in theory, if the fire reaches the nuclear waste, it will explode, it will catch fire, what will happen?
No. A dirty bomb isn't an explosion like a bomb goes boom and the building falls down. A dirty bomb is really a nuclear airborne event where the nuclear toxics literally are released into the atmosphere.
So basically, the fire, the methane would not necessarily ignite, but it would carry the particles of nuclear fissile material.
Right, it would react and release massive quantities of this nuclear material as airborne particulates.
Well, we've seen how well the government has responded to Flint, Michigan, and their water crisis. What could possibly go wrong here?
Everything. This is actually more dangerous than that. This could become a Fukushima type event because of the massive quantities of nuclear waste that was dumped there, and some of the oldest nuclear waste in existence. The older it gets, the more toxic it is. We already have proof from independent studies that benzene and radon have been released into our atmosphere. So it's not just water, it's air as well.
And is this what, coming up through the vents of the fire? I mean, because I know the way you're supposed to do landfill, at least the way you used to do landfill, was that you had these vents and the methane would come up through the vents and vent out into the air and dissipate.
Well, and if we didn't have the nuclear waste there, that could work. The problem is you have the nuclear waste mingled in with it that's already commingled. The venting apparently isn't really working very well. It's usually underground landfill fires occur when a landfill has not been properly maintained.
Quelle surprise. Yeah, okay, so now, I mean, why are we not hearing more about this in the mainstream national media?
Well, that's a good question. 2 years ago, Rolling Stone did an article on it. The New York Times did one in 1990. I think part of it is...
1990, 26 years ago.
Yes.
So we've only had 2 articles written about this in...
And Al Jazeera has done a few articles in the past year or two.
Okay. And none of it has made its way onto the radar screen. Why? Because of the cost of the cleanup, or what?
Well, some of it's made it to the radar screen, but like most problems, usually there's a smoking gun, and the smoking gun here was the actual Superfund law itself. When Superfund law was reauthorized, they changed it very conveniently so that the defendants, the polluters themselves, the defendants, get to not only sue EPA and the government if they don't like what the EPA is telling them to do, but more importantly, they get to control all site studies. I mean, think about this. That's like telling Manson at the time of his trial, mass murderer, you're going to have a trial, but guess what? You get to control all the evidence and you get to control all the witnesses, but we're sure we'll get to the bottom of it.
Being there in St. Louis, you were at the confluence of the mighty Mississippi, and if my geography is not too far off, you're not too far away from where the Missouri River also runs into the Mississippi. So these are massive trade and transport routes for everything from gas and oil to foodstuffs to down to the Gulf of Mexico and then out into the rest of the world. I mean, how can something like this be going on and there not be any attention paid to it?
Well, there has been some attention. The local paper, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, has done quite a bit. Although after a while, after so many individual articles, it's a situation if you can't see the forest through the trees. The fact is that this is about, in my opinion, protecting corporate interest. The Governor Jay Nixon, will not declare a state of emergency, even though this qualifies as such. Not for this anyway. He did for the flash flooding, but not for this. You basically have EPA, which is toothless. The community here wants the Army Corps of Engineers FUSRAP division to come in and take care of it. The reason they want it is if Army Corps of Engineers comes in, if they tell Republic Services and Exelon, do it this way, it has to be done. Where as long as EPA holds on to it, that's not the case. They can stymie things because, again, if you control all site studies, you can control how much information gets out and what kind of information.
I'm still struggling with this Superfund designation because that was created, in 1980, the whole Superfund project, and that's now almost 40 years old. And they've had some great hits, but they've also had some huge misses. Why has it taken... I mean, if we've known about this particular site since the end of the war, World War II, that is, why would this not be a priority cleanup site for Superfund?
It defies logic. We don't know. This is the only Superfund site in existence that has not been cleaned up by Army Corps of Engineers food scrap.
Wow, just a scary, scary story. Jeanine Molloff, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Dennis.